Rachel Donovan had once lived with the sound of jet engines in her veins. For years, the scream of afterburners and the thunder of metal slicing through the sky had been as natural to her as breathing. She was the kind of pilot others whispered about in training rooms, the kind who pulled impossible maneuvers in desperate moments and walked away without flinching. At Top Gun, she had been more than just good. She had been extraordinary. Her name etched itself into the memories of classmates, who still told stories about the ghost who could make an F-18 dance through the air. But that was another life, one she had buried 12 years ago. Now, Rachel lived in Seattle, surrounded not by steel hangars and runways, but by coffee shops, consultants, and boardrooms filled with engineers. Her days began not with pre-flight checks, but with meetings, spreadsheets, and the occasional site visit to an airfield where she spoke in calm, measured tones about maintenance schedules and structural integrity. It was a quieter existence, a safer one, and yet it often felt like she was merely playing a part. Her colleagues knew her as a sharp, dependable aviation consultant, someone with an uncanny understanding of flight systems, but none of them suspected the fire that once burned inside her. She had hidden it well. Rachel never displayed her medals, never told stories of late-night sorties over hostile skies, never explained why her eyes sometimes flickered toward the horizon whenever a fighter jet roared above. Her leather flight jacket, once a second skin, hung untouched at the back of her closet. On the inside, beneath the fading patches, the fabric still smelled faintly of fuel and adrenaline. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, though. She had promised herself she would never wear it again. Her neighbors thought of her as private but pleasant. She shared a smile at the mailbox, occasionally joined the local book club, and even volunteered at a veterans center, but she never revealed the depth of her own service. When asked if she had military ties, she would nod vaguely, deflect, and change the subject. It was easier that way, because the truth was painful. Rachel had walked away from Top Gun, from the Navy, from everything she had built, not out of boredom or exhaustion, but out of grief. 12 years earlier, during a training exercise, her wingman, a rookie pilot she had mentored, had lost control during a complex maneuver. Rachel had tried to save him, shouting commands into the radio, pushing her jet into dangerous angles to guide him back. But she was seconds too late. His aircraft spiraled into the ocean, disappearing in a flash of fire and foam. His name was Aaron Holt, 24 years old, bright smile. A young man who had believed Rachel could teach him how to master the skies. She never forgave herself. Though no investigation blamed her, though commanders told her it was an accident, Rachel felt the weight of his death, crushing her every time she climbed into the cockpit. She could no longer separate the joy of flying from the memory of failure. So she resigned. Quietly, suddenly, without fanfare. She packed her things, left her medals with her family, and disappeared into civilian life. At first, she thought time would heal her. She imagined that distance from the cockpit would dull the ache. But years passed, and still, whenever she heard a jet overhead, her chest tightened. Her dreams remained haunted by the screech of alarms, and Aaron's voice calling out in panic before the radio went silent. So Rachel built a new identity. In her consulting firm, she became known for her precision, her ability to anticipate problems before they happened. When asked how she understood systems so well, she smiled and said she had studied extensively. The truth was, she had lived inside those systems, felt every vibration of a jet straining under pressure, memorized every failure mode by heart. Her clients respected her expertise, but they didn't know the origin of it. She preferred it that way, yet, despite her efforts to remain hidden, the past lingered. Sometimes, at the Veterans Center, she caught sight of other former pilots. Their conversations carried the rhythms of people who had seen the same skies. They looked at her differently, with curiosity, as if they sensed the unspoken. One older Navy officer once leaned close and whispered, "You flew, didn't you?" She only smiled and said, "Just a little." Rachel didn't admit it, but a part of her longed for the air again. Not the combat, not the risks, but the pure exhilaration of being where few ever reached, soaring above the world, untethered. That longing clashed with her guilt, creating a silent war inside her. She told herself she had chosen the right path, that she had left for good reasons. But the quiet life felt hollow in ways she couldn't articulate. Late at night, she often stood by her apartment window, looking out at the lights of Seattle and listening for the faint echoes of jets training. Above the sound, she wondered if the sky remembered her. She wondered if she had abandoned it, or if it had abandoned her. 12 years. She had grown used to hiding. And yet, life has a way of calling us back to the very things we try hardest to forget. Rachel didn't know it yet, but her carefully constructed silence was about to shatter. The skies she had fled were waiting, patient and relentless. And when the call came sudden, urgent, impossible to ignore, Rachel Donovan would discover that some parts of ourselves can never truly be left behind. The day began like any other. Rachel Donovan had driven north from Seattle to a regional airbase for a consulting job routine. Nothing unusual, just a series of meetings with maintenance officers to review the readiness of their hangar facilities. She carried a leather satchel filled with blueprints and spreadsheets, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense knot, her demeanor composed. To the officers she worked with, she was simply Miss Donovan, precise, professional, calm. No one on that base suspected she had once walked among the Navy's elite. She moved through the hangar floor, inspecting aircraft resting quietly like sleeping predators. Engineers in grease-stained uniforms checked wiring and fuel lines, their conversations a mix of technical jargon and casual banter. Rachel listened, nodded, made notes on her tablet. For her, this world was familiar, but also detached. She no longer felt the adrenaline of being part of a squadron. She had told herself 1,000 times that she belonged here, on the ground, safe, distant. Then the alarms shattered everything. A sharp klaxon wailed across the airbase, the kind of sound that slices through bone and floods the body with instinctive dread. Rachel's head snapped up. Red lights flashed along the hangar walls, and over the intercom, a voice barked urgent commands. F-22 in distress, loss of communication link. All stations stand by. Repeat, F-22 in distress. For a moment, Rachel couldn't move. She froze as her pulse slammed against her ribs. She recognized that phrasing, that clipped tone of emergency reports, and in an instant, her brain filled in details others wouldn't know. A communication failure in an advanced fighter wasn't just a technical glitch. At high altitude, it meant isolation, disorientation, and potential disaster. Altitude dropping, a technician shouted as he rushed past her toward the control center. Rachel's feet carried her before her mind caught up. She abandoned her satchel on the hangar floor and followed the stream of personnel into the operations room. The air inside was electric, charged with fear and tension. Monitors glowed with radar signatures. Voices overlapped as officers tried to coordinate, but the panic was obvious. On the main screen, a single blip trembled, a lone F-22 Raptor struggling in the skies above. The pilot's calls crackled with static, his voice breaking in and out, barely audible. ... controls ... losing trim. Can't. The line dissolved. Rachel inhaled sharply, her throat tight. She had heard that tone before, years ago. Desperation, fear, the creeping edge of chaos. The kind of voice a pilot used seconds before losing everything. Her hands trembled against her sides. She wasn't Supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to care. She had buried this life, locked it away. But watching that screen, hearing the strain in that young man's voice, something primal awakened inside her. She moved closer to the commander's console, her eyes scanning the data. Angle of descent, airspeed, altitude dropping too fast. She recognized the pattern immediately. He was in a flat spin. Memories slammed into her training drills, emergencies, Ehrenholz's final moments. She forced the thoughts down, focusing instead on what was in front of her. Flat spins were deadly. Few ever escaped them. But there were ways she knew by heart. "Sir, we're losing him," one officer muttered. Sweat trickled down his temple as he adjusted his headset. Rachel's voice cut through the noise before she could stop herself. "You need to stabilize him by shifting to manual override on his yaw controls. He's fighting the computer, not the jet." Heads turned. The commander, a grizzled man with silver hair, narrowed his eyes at her. "Who are you?" Rachel's stomach clenched. She hadn't meant to speak, hadn't meant to reveal herself. But the words had slipped out as naturally as breathing. "I'm a consultant," she said weakly. A younger officer scoffed. "Consultants. Don't talk like that." Rachel's gaze stayed fixed on the trembling radar blip. She felt the old battle between silence and duty warring inside her. She could walk away now, let them dismiss her as some overstepping civilian. Or she could do what she had always done, fight for the pilot still screaming in the sky. Her voice steadied. "I flew with Top Gun. I know what he's going through." The room went still. Even the alarms seemed quieter. The commander studied her with suspicion, but there was no time for debate. The pilot's altitude was plummeting, his life measured in seconds. "Get her a headset," the commander ordered. Rachel's heart pounded as a technician shoved the gear into her hands. She slid the headset on, the static immediately flooding her ears. It was like slipping into an old skin, one she had sworn never to wear again. She swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Eagle 2-1, this is Donovan. I'm on your frequency. Can you hear me?" There was a pause, then a crackled response. Who is this?" Rachel closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. "Doesn't matter. I know where you are. Breathe. Listen to my voice." The control room held its collective breath. Officers who had doubted her now leaned forward, hope flickering in their eyes. As Rachel spoke, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, the memory of Aaron, the weight of her guilt, but layered over it was instinct, precision, clarity. She wasn't just Rachel Donovan, consultant. She was Rachel Donovan, Top Gun. And though 12 years had passed, her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced chaos before and walked away alive. For the first time in over a decade, she wasn't hiding. She was home. Rachel Donovan's voice hung in the air like a lifeline. For a moment, the control room felt suspended in silence. Every officer and technician frozen, as if afraid even a breath could shatter the fragile connection she had just made. "Eagle 2-1, she said again, steady and uncheckable. "Listen to me. You're not alone. I've got you." The static on the line hissed, then cracked. A young male voice broke through, strained and uneven. "Controls. They're not responding. I can't keep her steady. Altitude's dropping fast." Rachel's chest tightened. She could hear the fear in him, the ragged edge that came when adrenaline threatened to overwhelm training. She had been there herself. She had listened to that same panic in Ehrenholz, voiced 12 years earlier. But this time, she refused to lose another pilot. "You're going to be fine," Rachel said firmly. "We're going to work through this together. First, I need you to focus. Take a breath." The commander, standing stiffly at her shoulder, leaned close. Who the hell are you? Rachel didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on this. Monitors. Top Gun, class of '07, call sign, Raven. The words dropped like a bombshell. The younger officers who had scoffed at her earlier now exchanged wide-eyed glances. Everyone in the Navy aviation world knew about Top Gun graduates. They weren't just good, they were the best. Legends molded by fire and speed. One technician whispered under his breath, "Raven? I've heard that name before." The commanders. Gaze hardened, suspicion giving way to reluctant recognition. He didn't know the details, but clearly, he had just realized the consultant in front of him was no fraud. Still, the weight of years pressed on Rachel. She had avoided those words for over a decade, never daring to speak them aloud. And yet, here she was, her past laid bare in the heat of crisis. She pushed forward before doubt could creep back in. "Eagle 2-1, she called. "I need you to look at your yaw trim indicator. Tell me what you see." The pilot coughed, his voice thin over the comms. "It's redlining. Full deflection. I can't override." Rachel's mind spun through possibilities, filtering through 12 years of drills, failures, simulations. Flat spin. Flight control malfunction. An inexperienced pilot would fight the jet's computer instead of working with it. She spoke quickly but calmly. "You're fighting the system. Switch to backup manual override. Reach for the yellow handle on your left console, pull and hold. That gives you direct input. Forget what the computer says. Trust your hands." There was a pause, static. Then the pilot stammered, I've never done this outside a sim." "You can do it," Rachel said, her tone a blade cutting through fear. "I've done it. Hundreds of times. Trust me." Her words weren't just for him. They were for herself. Each instruction, each command, reawakened something she thought she had buried. Her muscles remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The rhythm of crisis, the cadence of survival. She was back in her element. "Altitude 22,000 and dropping," a radar tech reported. His voice shook. The commander turned sharply to Rachel. "If you're wrong, if I'm wrong, he dies anyway," Rachel cut in. Her eyes burned with intensity. "At least this gives him a chance." There was no more argument. The commander nodded once, grim, signaling for the room to follow. Her lead. In that instant, the entire base surrendered its doubt. Rachel Donovan was no longer an outsider. She was in command. "Okay, Eagle 2-1, she said, her voice lowering, steady as bedrock. "Pull the override now, slow and controlled. Don't jerk it." A long silence followed. Then, a strained grunt echoed through the comms. Metal creaked faintly in. The background, she could almost feel the aircraft fighting to obey. "Override engaged," the pilot gasped. "Controls." Sluggish, but responding. Relief rippled through the control room. A few officers exhaled audibly. Rachel didn't. Celebrate. She knew better. The hardest part was still ahead. "Good," she said firmly. "Now listen carefully. We're going to bleed off speed. Nose down, 3 degrees. Don't fight it when she shudders. That's normal. Just hold steady." The young pilot's breathing filled the headset. Uneven. Terrified. Rachel softened her tone just enough to keep him anchored. "You're not the first to face this. You won't be the last. But you'll be one of the few to walk away. Stay with me." The blip on the radar trembled, dipping erratically, then slowly began to stabilize. The descent slowed. The room erupted in murmurs, but Rachel stayed locked in focus. "You've got this," she whispered, though she didn't know if she was speaking to him or to herself. For Rachel, the minutes stretched into eternity. Sweat trickled down her back as she guided the pilot step by step. Every command she gave was measured, every pause calculated to keep his panic from spiraling. She could hear the fear in his silence between responses, but he followed her. He trusted her. And in those moments, Rachel realized something that shook her more than the crisis itself. She hadn't lost it. All those years of hiding, all the nights of guilt, all the days convincing herself she was no longer a pilot, they hadn't erased what lived inside her. Her instincts were intact. Her training was still sharp. She was still Raven. The thought terrified her. Altitude 15,000, the technician called out. The commander leaned close again, his voice low. You've got him this far. Can you get him home? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her mind flashed back to Aaron Holt, his final scream over the comms, the helplessness that had driven her away. She had failed once. She couldn't fail again. Her voice steadied. Yes, but I need full control of the comms. No one else cuts in. He only listens to me now. The commander studied her, then gave a sharp nod. It's yours. Rachel adjusted her headset, her jaw set with determination. She no longer spoke as a consultant, or even as a former pilot. She spoke as Raven, the one who had once ruled. The skies. Eagle 2-1, she said, her voice fierce but calm. We're going to bring you home. The young pilot answered, his voice steadier than before. Copy that, Raven. Rachel's eyes widened at the word. Somehow, he knew her call sign. Somehow, her legend had reached even him. In that moment, something inside her broke open, not in fear, but in acceptance. The past she had run from wasn't chains holding her down. It was wings. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was flying again. The headset pressed firmly against Rachel's ears, sealing her into a tunnel where only two voices existed, hers and the young pilot's. Around her, the control room buzzed with activity radar screens flickered. Technicians exchanged frantic whispers. Commanders gestured at data feeds, but all of that was background noise. The only thing that mattered was the unstable F-22, carving a dangerous path through the sky and the terrified rookie inside. Eagle 2-1, Rachel said, her tone calm but commanding. You're not going to fight her. Fighting the jet is how she wins. We're going to work with her, step by step. Copy? The line crackled before his voice came through, thin and uneven. Copy, Raven. The call sign caught her off guard again. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, not since her last sortie. For a second, it stung like a blade. But she pushed the reaction down. Right now, she needed to. Be Raven. For him. Good, she continued. Check your altitude. 14,000. Dropping, he answered, his breathing still ragged. Rachel leaned toward the main screen, eyes narrowing. Okay, we're going to bleed off speed before the spin gets worse. Nose down, 3 degrees. Smooth, not sharp. Don't overcorrect. I don't know if I can. You can. She cut him off, voice firm. I've seen worse. I've flown worse. You've got this. Just listen. Around her, the room remained silent. Officers who had dismissed her only minutes ago now hung on her every word, as if the rhythm of her voice alone was keeping the aircraft aloft. The young pilot grunted faintly, then said, Nose down, 3 degrees, holding. The radar trace dipped, then steadied slightly. Good, Rachel said softly, almost under her breath. Then louder, that's it. She's talking to you now? Feel the shudder? That's airflow coming back across your wings. Don't panic when she shakes, let her breathe. The pilot let out a nervous laugh, the kind that comes in the middle of sheer terror. She's definitely shaking. Rachel almost smiled. Humor meant he was still with her, still present. That was a good sign. Altitude 13.5, a technician reported. Rachel's hands tightened into fists on the console in front of her. Every number felt like a countdown clock. She needed him stable before 10,000, or it would be too late. Okay, she said, her voice even. Let's go to half throttle. Don't slam it. Ease her back. You're in control. Half throttle, easing, throttle back. The Raptor's trace on the screen shifted. The wild swings were narrowing. The aircraft beginning to respond. Relief flickered in the room, but Rachel didn't let herself relax. One wrong move, one burst of panic, and it would spiral again. Her chest ached with the memory of Aaron Holt, his desperate voice, his final scream. She had failed then. But she wouldn't fail now. You're doing great, Eagle 2-1, she said. Keep breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. You don't fly the jet with your muscles. You fly it with your mind. The silence stretched long enough that she worried he'd lost consciousness. Then he exhaled hard. Copy. Breathing. Holding half throttle. Rachel's pulse steadied a fraction. He was still with her. Altitude 12.8, another officer called. The commander shifted beside her, his arms crossed tight. He's not out of danger. Rachel didn't even look at him. No one said he was. Minutes crawled by. Rachel continued to issue instructions in clipped, precise phrases, the kind designed to cut through fear and exhaustion. She walked him through minor corrections: roll 2 degrees left, trim stabilizers, ease throttle adjustments, each step calculated to regain incremental control. At first, his responses were shaky, uncertain. But gradually, she heard the change. His breathing slowed. His voice grew steadier. You've got this, Rachel told him, her voice almost maternal now. The jet doesn't own you. You own her. There was a pause before he answered, quieter this time. Raven, how do you know all this? The question lodged in her chest. For a moment, the control room vanished. She was back in a cockpit, oxygen mask tight across her face, sunlight blazing off the canopy. The years melted away. She hesitated, then answered. Because I've been where you are. I've pulled out of spins like this. And I've watched what happens when someone doesn't. You don't need to know more than that. Just fly. The silence that followed was heavy, but his tone when he finally responded carried new weight. Copy that, Raven. Rachel exhaled slowly. The past would stay in the past, at least for now. Altitude 12,000, the technician reported. Rachel's mind calculated quickly. They needed to slow the descent further. At this rate, they'd have a fighting chance, but only if he held steady. Okay, Eagle 2-1, she said. We're going to initiate a rudder input small, controlled. Right rudder, 1 second, then neutral. Do not hold it. The pilot inhaled sharply. That could snap me into a tumble. It could, Rachel agreed, her voice low but calm. But it won't if you trust me. Do it now. The room tensed, a grunt, then static. Rachel leaned closer, eyes locked on the radar. The blip shuddered violently, then steadied. Rudder input complete, the pilot panted, stabilizing. Altitude holding at 11.9, the technician shouted. A cheer erupted in the back of the room, quickly hushed by the commander's glare. But the relief was undeniable. Rachel let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were trembling, though her voice had never betrayed. She forced her focus back into the headset. You're out of the worst of it, she told him. But we're not done. We'll bring you down slow, safe, and clean. Copy. Raven, I'm with you. The young pilot's trust was palpable now. He didn't question her anymore. He followed every word. The room, too, had fallen into rhythm with her. No one interrupted. No one challenged her authority. Even the commander stood back, watching with grudging respect. Rachel realized what had happened. She had stepped back into command without even meaning to. and it fit like a second skin. But beneath the calm surface, her heart still ached. Saving this pilot wouldn't erase Aaron Holt. It wouldn't undo 12 years of silence. But maybe, just maybe, it could mean she wasn't finished. Maybe Raven still had something left to give. Altitude 11.5 and holding, the technician called. Stability improving. Rachel nodded, though her jaw remained tight. All right, Eagle 2-1. Next step, we prepare for controlled descent. The pilot's voice was stronger now, though still tense. Roger that, I'm ready. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. This was far from over. But he believed in her. The room believed in her. For the first time in 12 years, she believed in herself. The storm wasn't done, but she had found her voice inside it. The room was thick with tension, every monitor glowing like an altar around Rachel as she leaned into the console. Eagle 2-1's F-22 was steadier than it had been minutes ago, but the jet was still bleeding altitude at a rate that could spell disaster if not corrected soon. The storm wasn't gone. It was simply circling. Rachel knew what had to happen next, but the maneuver she had in mind was the kind that separated pilots from legends. If done right, it would level the Raptor, restore full control, and give the rookie the chance to land. If done wrong, it would snap the jet into a flat spin so vicious no ejection seat could save him. Her voice needed to carry no doubt. Eagle 2-1, she said evenly. You've done great. You've stabilized her. But now comes the hardest part. We're going to execute a controlled counter-yaw maneuver. It's the only way to break the oscillation before it drags you down. The pilot's voice cracked faintly. Counter-yaw? At this speed? Rachel didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. It's dangerous, but it's what will save you. You'll have one chance. You have to trust me completely. Static filled the headset for several beats. The silence stretched so long that Rachel could almost hear her own pulse in her ears. Finally, his voice returned, quieter, steadier. Raven, I trust you. Those words struck harder than she expected. The last man who trusted her, Aaron Holt, hadn't survived. But this time had to be different. The commander shifted beside her, breaking the moment. You can't be serious, Winters. That's insane. We should prepare for ejection procedures. Rachel turned on him sharply, her eyes blazing. If he ejects at this angle, the chute won't clear the spin. He'll be shredded. Counter-yaw is his only chance. The commander hesitated. Around them, the technicians looked between the two, torn but silent. Rachel's certainty was a wall. None dared to breach. At last, the commander gave a stiff nod, gesturing for her to proceed. Rachel refocused on the headset. Eagle 2-1, listen carefully. We'll go step by step. This is going to feel wrong. Every instinct in you will scream to pull back. You must resist. The jet is going to thrash, but she'll come back if you let her. The pilot exhaled shakily. Step by step. I can do that. Rachel's eyes locked on the radar. First, set throttle to 1/4. Ease it in, don't jerk. Throttle 1/4. Holding. The blip steadied slightly. Good. Now, prepare for rudder input. Left rudder, short burst, then neutral. Immediately after, full opposite aileron roll, but only for 2 seconds. Do not exceed 2. His voice wavered. That'll flip me. That'll save you, she corrected firmly. This isn't about muscle. It's about timing. One wrong second, and she owns you again. But if you hold, if you trust you, walk away from this. Silence. Then, roger that. Rachel's knuckles whitened on the console. She could almost feel herself back in the cockpit. Oxygen mask pressed tight, fingers on the stick. Her body remembered the sensation of a jet fighting against her, the chaos of metal and air locked in battle. She remembered Holt's last scream, the one that had followed her into every dream since. Not this time. Execute rudder input now. Static. Then the pilot's grunt of exertion. On the screen, the blip jolted, the spin threatening to rear its head again. Neutral rudder. Hold. I've got it. Now full opposite roll. 2 seconds. Count them out loud. 1, 2. Neutral. The radar trace lurched wildly. The technicians gasped as the blip seemed to freefall. Rachel held her breath. Then, like a miracle, the blip steadied, the arc smoothing into a controlled descent path. I think it worked, the pilot breathed, half in. Shock. Raven, she's flying. The room erupted in restrained cheers. Technicians slapping consoles, shoulders shaking in relief. Even the commander muttered a quiet oath under his breath. Rachel closed her eyes, fighting the sting that burned behind them. Good work, Eagle 2-1. You're not out yet, but you're alive. Now we get you home. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Rachel guided him through trim adjustments, throttle management, and controlled banking. Slowly, the Raptor transformed from a bucking beast into a machine under command. The pilot's voice grew steadier with each exchange. His trust in her voice became absolute, his reliance total. The fear that had threatened to overwhelm him at the start was now tempered by something else. Confidence. You've done this before, he said suddenly, his tone more curious than afraid. Rachel hesitated, the weight of her past pressing on her like gravity. She chose her words carefully. Yes, more times than I can count. Then, why aren't you still flying? The question was like a blade to the gut. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Around her, the room seemed to fade, replaced by memories of smoke, fire, and Holt's final scream echoing across the radio. Because sometimes, she said finally, her voice low, the sky takes more than it gives. And some scars never heal. The pilot didn't press. But his next words were filled with something like reverence. Well, it's giving me my life back right now, thanks to you. Rachel swallowed hard, unable to respond. Altitude 9,000 and steady, a technician reported. Rachel nodded sharply. They had lost altitude, yes, but the jet was no longer spiraling to its death. Now came the next challenge, descent and landing. Eagle 2-1, she said, her tone steadying again. We'll set you up for a controlled glide back to base. It won't be pretty, but you'll make it. Follow me exactly. Copy that. Her eyes flicked briefly to the commander. His expression was unreadable, but there was no mistaking the grudging respect in his stance. He gave her the smallest nod, one that said, "This is your fight now." Rachel turned back to the headset, her voice soft but unyielding. Stay with me, kid. We're bringing you home. As the Raptor began its slow path back toward the base, the control room seemed to exhale as one. Yet Rachel's heart remained clenched. This was far from over. 1,000 things could still go wrong on approach. But for the first time since Holt's death, she felt the edge of redemption within reach. This time, she had not faltered. This time, she had kept a voice alive in the storm. And for the first time in 12 years, Raven had returned to the sky. The Raptor was no longer a chaotic force. It had transformed into a fragile, tense instrument under the guidance of Rachel Donovan's voice. Yet fragile was relative. Every minor twitch of the jet, every microsecond miscalculated by the rookie pilot, threatened to undo the painstaking stabilization they had fought for. Eagle 2-1, Rachel said calmly but with intensity. We've survived the spin. We're past the worst, but now comes the trickiest part. Approach and landing. Everything has to be precise. Listen to me exactly, and you'll walk away. Yes, listening, the pilot said, his voice steady but tense, a mixture of fear and awe. Rachel's eyes never left the monitors. The radar blip traced a slow, deliberate path toward the base. The terrain beneath them shifted from the infinite sky to hints of coastline and forest. She could almost smell the Pacific, feel the wind of the jet's descent. The base's runway glimmered faintly in the distance on the HUD overlay. Every calculation mattered: angle, speed, throttle, trim. Throttle down to 20%. Rachel instructed. Ease her. Smooth, gentle adjustments only. We can't overcorrect. The pilot followed. The Raptor shuddered slightly, and Rachel felt the familiar tension of a living machine fighting for compliance. I feel her. She's twitching. That's normal. Let her move. Don't fight it. Guide her. Don't dominate her, Rachel said, her voice a lifeline. Each command was deliberate, designed to steady the pilot's panic as much as the aircraft itself. Around her, the control room was tense but silent. Officers leaned toward screens. Technicians held their breaths, and the commander watched, arms crossed, jaw tight. Rachel's calm dominance had become their anchor, though none admitted it aloud. Altitude 8,000, a technician called. Rachel exhaled lightly. Good. Keep your angle shallow. Glide toward the base at a 3-degree descent. Keep the nose slightly high. Watch your airspeed. Don't let it drop below 200 knots. 200, holding, the pilot replied. His voice carried focus now, though faint tremors betrayed the fear still simmering beneath. Excellent. You're doing this? Well, almost there, Rachel said, but her voice carried an undercurrent of tension. Almost was not safe yet. Almost was a knife's edge. Rachel's mind raced through every possible failure scenario. Hydraulic lag, gusts of wind, uneven throttle. Response all could tip the aircraft into disaster at this stage. But the pilot was following instructions precisely. His hands had steadied, his breathing measured. For now, he was hers to guide. Trim stabilizers. Slight right, she said. Hold. 1 click. Good. Now check your yaw again. Center, perfect. Keep it there. Center, stabilizers set. Right, click done, the pilot confirmed. Rachel could feel a surge of cautious relief. He was adapting, learning under her voice, trusting her implicitly. But the hard part remained, landing a jet like the F-22 at speed while managing residual system quirks. Many pilots had failed here. Eagle 2-1, runway in sight? She asked. Yes, barely. I can see the lights. Good, you're doing perfectly. Next, flare her at 500 feet. Don't overdo it. Gently pull back on the stick. Hold throttle steady. Let her touch softly. The jet shuddered again. Pulling, flare. Rachel's heartbeat synchronized with the monitor readings. The Raptor's descent angle was steady, but one misstep, 1 extra degree, and it would clip the tarmac harshly, snapping wings or gear. Feel her response? Smooth, gentle, not abrupt. Let her glide into the runway. You are not fighting the jet, you are guiding her home. Yes, guiding. The tension in the control room was palpable. Even the youngest technician, barely a year out of flight school, could feel the fear vibrating through the room like a second heartbeat. Altitude 400 feet. Flare now, Rachel instructed. The blip trembled violently on the radar. The pilot's voice cracked. She's. Hold. Trust me. Steady. You've got this. Don't jerk the stick. Keep throttle steady. Glide her. Don't force her, Rachel said, her voice unwavering despite the memories crashing through her mind. The memory of Aaron Holtz. Crash screamed behind her eyes, threatening to paralyze her. She blocked it, not this time. The jet shuddered violently, skimming turbulence from the wind over the runway approach. The pilot gritted his teeth. His hands were steady now, guided by her calm. 300 feet, flare gently. The blip aligned perfectly with the runway lights. Rachel's eyes narrowed, calculating each microsecond, every slight variation in the descent path. The pilot exhaled, touching. She's touching. Rachel's chest heaved with tension. Hold, hold. The Raptor rolled along the runway, nose slightly high, wings trembling. It slowed. The tires screeched faintly as the jet finally came to a halt, engines idling. A stunned silence filled the control room. Then a cheer erupted. Officers clapped, some pounding consoles, technicians shouting in relief. Even the commander released a long, slow exhale, his shoulders sagging with relief. Rachel's hands fell to her sides. She removed the headset slowly, as if lifting a weight she hadn't realized she'd carried. The pilot's voice came over the comms again. Quieter now, reverent. Raven, I made it. Thanks to you, I'm alive. Rachel blinked, unable to respond immediately. Her throat felt thick. The past 12 years of guilt, fear, and loss seemed to converge in that single moment. She had guided him. She had done what she could not do for Holt. The pilot emerged from the cockpit minutes later, visibly shaking, his face pale but alive. He stumbled toward the control room, tears welling in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you, he whispered. Rachel managed a small nod. She said nothing, because words were unnecessary. The young man had survived. That was enough. The commander finally spoke, his voice rough. I've seen a lot in my time, but I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that. Donovan, Raven, you just saved a life. Rachel didn't meet his eyes. She finally exhaled fully, feeling a release she hadn't known she needed. 12 years of hiding, running, and guilt all condensed into this moment where a life was saved because she had stepped back into the sky, even if only through voice and memory. Around her, the control room buzzed with congratulations, questions, and admiration. But Rachel remained quiet, staring at the runway through the control room windows. The jet sat there, engines humming softly, lights flickering on the tarmac. It was alive. The pilot was alive. And she had done it. For the first time in over a decade, Rachel allowed herself to feel it. Pride, relief, redemption. Not all scars healed, but some wounds could finally begin to close. A pilot approached her, still trembling. Raven, why'd you leave the Navy? Why hide all this? Rachel swallowed. She looked out at the runway, then back at him. Some scars never heal. Sometimes you leave to survive yourself. But that doesn't mean the sky forgets you. And sometimes it calls you back. The young man nodded slowly, a mixture of understanding and awe. He had witnessed something legendary, something impossible, guided by a voice forged from experience, regret, and unbroken skill. Rachel felt the pull again, the one she had fought for 12 years. She had glimpsed it today, the roar of engines, the thrill of danger, the responsibility, and the life she could still influence. She had returned, and the sky had welcomed her back. But this time, she would not let it consume her in the same way. She had survived. She had guided another. And she had reclaimed the part of herself she thought she had lost forever. The F-22 sat idle on the runway, but the echo of its flight lingered in the room and inside her. This was the bridge between past and future, the moment where guilt transformed into purpose. Raven had returned not to fight wars alone, but to shape lives, guide the untested, and face the storms she could now meet with confidence. And somewhere, deep in her chest, a quiet promise formed. The sky might be unforgiving, but she was no longer afraid. The roar of the F-22 engines had faded, leaving behind only the hum of the control room, the low chatter of officers, and the occasional beep of monitors. Rachel Donovan stood at the edge of the runway, her hands tucked into her pockets, staring at the jet that had carried a life from near certain death to safety. Every inch of its sleek, angular frame reminded her of what she had once lived for: the speed, the precision, the dance with danger. But now it also carried the weight of what she had lost and what she could still save. She had spent 12 years hiding from herself, from the memories that clawed at her every time a jet screamed overhead. She had constructed a life that was careful, quiet, and seemingly safe, building spreadsheets and consulting reports as walls between herself and the past. But today had torn those walls down. One voice, one crisis, one young pilot clinging to life had reminded her of who she was and who she could still be. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by a different kind of awareness. Fatigue, yes, but also clarity. She could feel her pulse returning to a normal rhythm, her chest loosening after the weeks, months, and years of tension that had built inside her. Yet she couldn't shake the ghostly echo of Aaron Holt, the student she had lost, whose death had driven her away from the sky. She closed her eyes briefly and let the memory wash over her. He had been bright, reckless, and full of promise. Kind of young pilot every instructor secretly hoped to shape into something legendary. And in the end, she had failed him. No commendation, no medal, no reassurances from her superiors could erase that memory. She had walked away from the Navy, not because she no longer loved flying, but because the sky had demanded a price she wasn't ready to pay. And now she had saved someone. A different student, a different life, but the responsibility had been the same. The weight she had carried for years, guilt, shame, fear, had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. It had transformed from a wound into a bridge, a reminder that she could still do good, still guide, still influence. She turned slightly as the young pilot approached. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of awe, relief, and exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, glancing at her with something unspoken in his eyes. "Raven," he said softly. I don't know how to thank you." Rachel's mouth tightened, and she gave a small nod. Words were unnecessary. The gratitude in his eyes, the way he carried the terror and the relief together, said everything she needed to hear. She had guided him. She had been the voice in the storm. She had reclaimed a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. Around them, officers and technicians were wrapping up procedures, discussing the incident with varying levels of relief and awe. The commander approached her, his expression unreadable at first. Then, slowly, it softened. "You saved him," he said simply. "I don't care if you're a civilian consultant now, or what you've been hiding for 12 years. You saved him. That counts for everything." Rachel allowed herself a brief smile, but she didn't speak. The satisfaction was quiet, almost internal, not for accolades or recognition, but for knowing that she had acted when it mattered most. Later, in the quiet of the hangar, Rachel found herself alone for a moment. She ran her hands over the leather flight jacket that had hung untouched for over a decade. The smell of old fuel and the faint tang of adrenaline lingered in the fabric, and she remembered every sortie, every close call, every late-night training drill. The jacket had been a symbol of the life she had abandoned, but now it felt like a bridge back to herself. She lifted it, slipped her arms into it, and let herself feel the old thrill, the rush of wind, the vibration of the controls beneath her hands, the intimate knowledge of the sky as a living entity that demanded respect and skill. For the first time in 12 years, she allowed herself to remember why she had loved it so much. And she realized that the sky had never truly left her. She had left it, yes, but it had waited patiently, calling her back in moments like these, in crises that demanded her voice, her experience, her instinct. Rachel sat on a bench near the hangar, the jacket draped over her shoulders, and let herself reflect. Saving Eagle 2-1 had reminded her of the joy of mastery, the responsibility of experience, and the fulfillment of guiding another to survive where many would fail. It had reminded her that her skills were not wasted, that the years she thought were lost could still shape lives, still influence outcomes, still matter. Her phone buzzed a message from the consulting office. They were asking if she could attend a conference later in the week. She stared at the screen, the request feeling trivial now compared to the events of the day. The words on the screen seemed to mock the life she had built. Safe, controlled, predictable. Safe, yes, but unfulfilled. Rachel looked back toward the runway, where the young pilot's Raptor sat, its engines quiet now, but its presence commanding. She thought of the calls she had made over the headset, the precise instructions, the calm authority she had wielded in the storm. That part of her had never faded. It had only been dormant. And now, she knew, it could rise again. The memory of Aaron Holt crept back into her mind, not as a weight of guilt, but as a reminder of why she had hidden. She had feared that the past would consume her, that she could never face the sky again without carrying the ache of loss. But Saving Eagle 2-1 had shown her that she could face it differently now. She could channel the pain into purpose, transform the haunting into guidance, and take her experience into the next generation of pilots. She stood slowly, the leather jacket heavy on her shoulders, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The runway stretched out, a ribbon of possibility. The air smelled of fuel ozone, and rain lingering from an earlier storm. The world felt alive again, full of opportunities she had refused to see for years. Rachel Donovan had hidden her past for 12 long years, but today had proven that the past was never truly gone. It was part of her, a foundation for the future. The sky had called her, and she had answered, not recklessly, not out of pride, but with the skill, patience, and courage that only experience can forge. She allowed herself a small smile, one that held both relief and recognition. The road ahead was uncertain. She didn't know if she would return to active flight or continue consulting, or how she would integrate the lessons of the day into the life she had built. But she knew one thing. She would never run from her past again. She would never hide the part of herself that had been forged in jet engines and adrenaline, loss and survival. That part of her could guide, protect, and inspire others. That part of her was alive. Rachel turned to the young pilot, who approached quietly. He was smiling, shaken but steady now. "Raven," he said softly, "I don't think I'll ever forget today. You saved me. Not just my life, but my confidence, my belief that I can do this." Rachel nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle into a renewed sense of purpose. "You did the hard part," she said. "I just guided you through it. Remember that. Trust yourself the next time." "And the time after that?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "I will. Thank you." As he walked away toward the hangar exit, Rachel remained standing, watching the horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in gold and crimson. The air felt alive, the sky endless. And for the first time in over a decade, Rachel felt whole. The past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer bound her. She could move forward, take the lessons of loss, of silence, and of survival, and transform them into something meaningful. She had been hiding for 12 years, but now she knew some callings never fade, some voices never quiet, and some pilots never truly leave the sky. Rachel Donovan Raven smiled quietly to herself. The sky was waiting, and she was ready to return on her terms, with purpose and without fear. The hangar had emptied. leaving Rachel alone with the quiet hum of the airbase and the faint echo of the F-22’s engines cooling in the distance. She leaned against a support beam, leather jacket still draped over her shoulders, her eyes tracing the lines of the runway stretching out into the fading light. The events of the day replayed in her mind, each moment vivid, each heartbeat a reminder of what she had faced and overcome. 12 years of silence, of avoidance, of guilt, had culminated in this one pivotal day, and it had changed her. Rachel's thoughts returned to the young pilot she had saved. Eagle 2-1 had survived because she had answered the call, because she had trusted her instincts, because she had allowed herself to step back into the sky, even if only metaphorically through her guidance. Watching him leave the hangar with that mixture of awe, relief, and newfound confidence had stirred something deep within her, a recognition that her experience, her past, and her courage still mattered. She recalled the fear that had gripped her when she first heard the F-22’s distress call, how her pulse had surged, how every muscle had remembered training long dormant, how her mind had surged with memories she had tried to bury. And yet, in that instant of crisis, she had acted with clarity, precision, and authority. She had saved a life, and in doing so, she had saved a piece of herself too. Rachel turned her gaze back to the runway. The golden hue of the sunset reflected off the tarmac, casting long, dramatic shadows across the hangar floor. The sky was wide, limitless, and beckoning, whispering the call she had tried to ignore for over a decade. She had once fled from it, believing the cost was too high, the pain too sharp. But now she knew differently. The sky was not a place of fear, it was a place of purpose. Her hand brushed the edge of her flight jacket. The leather was worn, familiar, carrying the scent of fuel and the faint residue of adrenaline, a tactile reminder of every mission she had flown, every lesson learned, every life touched. She could almost feel the vibration of the controls beneath her fingers, the roar of the engines in her chest, the wind whipping past her face as she banked, dived, and climbed through clouds. That sensation, once terrifying and exhilarating, was calling her home. Rachel thought of Aaron Holt. His memory had haunted her for years, a shadow she could never escape. She had believed leaving the Navy, leaving the skies, and leaving herself behind would silence that voice. But it had not. Today, however, she realized she could honor that memory differently, not through guilt, but through action. She could save lives, guide the untested, and face challenges with wisdom tempered by experience. She could be Raven once more, not recklessly, but deliberately. The sound of footsteps drew her attention. Commander Harris approached, his expression a mix of curiosity and unspoken admiration. "I've been thinking," he began carefully. "You've proven yourself today, not just as a pilot, but as a leader, a teacher. A Navy could use someone like you, even now." Rachel studied him for a moment, considering the weight of his words. Returning to active flight wasn't a decision to be made lightly. She had responsibilities here, commitments, and a life she had built deliberately away from the chaos of the cockpit. Yet the thought of never returning to the skies, of never guiding another young pilot through danger, felt wrong. The fire that had lain dormant inside her for 12 years had sparked again, and she wasn't ready to extinguish it. "I appreciate that," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. "But I'm not sure it's about returning. At least, not in the way people expect. Today reminded me that I can make a difference without being in the cockpit myself. I can train, mentor, guide. I can keep others alive. That's my way back." The commander nodded slowly, as though he had expected her answer, but respected the conviction behind it. "Mentorship is invaluable," he said, "and you've just proven that. But if you ever decide the skies need you again, don't hesitate. The Navy won't forget Raven. Rachel allowed herself a small, private smile. She had no intention of forgetting either. Raven was part of her, inseparable from the lessons, memories, and courage she had gained. She would use that experience to shape others, to ensure that young pilots survived where others might falter. And perhaps, in the future, she would return to the cockpit herself, not out of obligation, but out of choice. She walked slowly toward the Raptor, now silent, sleek, and still. She ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the familiar grooves and panels beneath her fingers. The jet had been a crucible, a teacher, a mirror. It had tested her, forced her to confront her past, and reminded her of the skill and courage she possessed. Rachel exhaled and stepped back, taking in the sunset-drenched horizon. The sky was vast, endless, and beautiful, a place of freedom, challenge, and redemption. She could feel the pull again, the irresistible call of the clouds and the wind. But this time, it was tempered by wisdom, by reflection, and by the knowledge that she could impact lives without necessarily risking her own. The young pilot, Eagle 2-1, returned briefly to thank her once more. "I won't forget today," he said. "You saved my life, and maybe showed me what it means to be a pilot." Rachel nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You've earned it. Just remember what I told you. Trust yourself, follow your instincts, and respect the jet. The sky is unforgiving, but it rewards those who listen." As he departed toward the hangar exit, Rachel turned to the runway, the sun now dipping fully below the horizon. The clouds blushed with the final light of day, casting the world in gold, crimson, and violet. She felt the familiar ache of longing, tempered by purpose. She could stay here, she could continue mentoring, but she knew that someday she might climb back into a cockpit again, on her own terms, with no fear and no shame. For now, though, she allowed herself to simply stand, to feel the quiet triumph of survival and guidance. She had faced the storm, saved a life, and reclaimed a part of herself she had long denied. Raven had returned, not as a shadow of the past, but as a voice of experience, a guide for those who needed it, and a testament to the resilience of skill, courage, and purpose. She inhaled deeply, savoring the cool evening air, the faint scent of fuel, and the endless sky stretching above. For the first time in 12 years, Rachel Donovan felt complete. She had been tested, she had faltered, she had hidden, and yet she had returned stronger, wiser, and more alive than ever. The night would come, and the hangar would empty, but the lessons, the lives touched, and the courage she had reclaimed would endure. She had answered the call of the sky, and it had answered back. And as the stars began to pierce the darkening horizon, Rachel Donovan Raven smiled quietly to herself. The skies were waiting, and she would rise again. The past was behind her, the future ahead, and the present a life reclaimed, a life of purpose, and a life that would soar was hers to live.